She didn't scream. There was no primal roar of frustration, no guttural release of anger into the stale, recycled air of the gym. She didn't curse. No colorful, blistering expletives aimed at the rafters, the coaches, or the universe that had seemingly realigned itself against her. She didn't throw anything. No water bottle sent crashing into the bleachers, no towel whipped in disgust. Her hands, usually instruments of such fierce and public expression, hung still at her sides. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, a measured, deliberate cadence that echoed with a finality that a tantrum could never achieve. And in that single, crystalline moment, the hollow thud of the double doors swinging shut behind her, the piercing, accusatory squeak of her sneakers making one last protest against the cold, polished hardwood angel Reese, the double-double avatar, the national champion, the unignorable force of nature in women's basketball, did something that sent silent, seismic shockwaves through the very heart of Team USA. But here is the truth, the core of it all, the detail lost in the spectacle of the exit. The internet in its haste would crown the walkout the moment. The rupture was not the story, it was merely the echo, the tremor that reaches the surface long after the fault line has slipped deep below. The story, the real, raw, tectonic shift, happened in the 90 seconds before the doors swung. In the final, fraying moments of a camp that was supposed to be about unity, about assembling a machine for international gold, something far more elemental occurred. What Caitlin Clark did on that court, in front of stone-faced coaches, invisible cameras of memory, and every elite player who had ever questioned her place in this pantheon, didn't just change a practice. It changed a paradigm. It reset a hierarchy, it whispered a future, and in doing so made the present unbearable for some. What's good, family? Welcome back. If you're new here, understand this, buckle up. This isn't a gossip piece about clashing egos. This is a case study in sporting evolution. This is about the moment the currency of the game changed hands. This is a moment that will be studied in film rooms, debated on barstools, and replayed in the minds of those who were there for years to come. Now, before we dive into the heart of this storm, and trust me, every shadow in that gym holds a detail you need to hear, do the community a solid. Smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and turn on those notifications. Because by the end of this, you're going to see the game itself through a different lens. You're going to understand exactly why the landscape of the WNBA, and more importantly, the very identity of Team USA, will forever bear the timestamp of this day. Let's set the stage. Team USA Training Camp, a temple of excellence. The atmosphere by design is one of controlled professional calm. It's a sanctuary for veterans, a space where the game's legends come to grind in relative silence to hone the subtle, unspoken chemistry required to conquer the world. It's a place of known quantities, established pecking orders, and respectful nods. It is not a place for revolutions. But the moment Caitlin Clark stepped through those heavy double doors, a silence fell. Not the quiet of focus, but the heavy, dense silence of a suspended breath. The kind of quiet where the hum of the air conditioning becomes a roar and the rhythmic bounce of a single ball sounds like a funeral drum. It was the silence of an ecosystem sensing a new apex predator. See, Caitlin didn't arrive with fanfare. No entourage, no trailing press corps desperate for a soundbite. She was just a figure, head slightly down, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder, the uniform of a player reporting for duty. But she moved with a quiet certainty that was itself a declaration. She wasn't any other player, and in that gym, a congregation of the best in the world, everyone from the head coach to the ball attendant knew it. They felt it in their bones. Within minutes, not hours, not days, minutes, the physics of the room bent. The air, once a neutral medium, became charged. The energy previously diffused among the veterans began to swirl, to coalesce, to be drawn toward a single point on the floor. Coaches mid-instruction let their sentences trail off. Players stretching on the sideline paused, a hamstring half extended, forgot. Because when Caitlin Clark touched a basketball for the first time in that space, the ordinary became orchestrated. Drills that were rote, muscle memory exercises suddenly pulsed with new intent. Passes didn't just travel from A to B. They zipped on a wire, hitting seams that seemed to open a half-second before the ball arrived. The spacing on the floor, usually a theoretical diagram, became a live, breathing geometry. The pace didn't just quicken, it transformed, becoming fluid, urgent, and inevitable. It was as if someone had found the master tempo for the entire sport and dialed it in. Paige Buchers felt it first. On the opposite end, running a simple motion drill, a peripheral flicker caught her eye. A glance, then a full stop. What she saw wasn't a player going through paces. It was a conductor commanding an orchestra. Caitlin wasn't just executing the drill, she was inhabiting it, bending its possibilities. Every cut was read and rewarded before it was fully made. Every screen was leveraged not just for the ball handler, but for the second and third options unfolding behind it. The ball moved with a hypnotic, gravitational pull. The offense didn't run, it flowed like water finding the path of least resistance, which was, invariably, the path Caitlin dictated. And Paige, the savant, the player who sees the game in layers, smiled, a small, private, knowing smile. She wasn't seeing a tryout, she was witnessing a coronation, a silent, seamless transfer of power. But across the court, standing sentinel near the baseline, arms folded like steel bars across her chest, Angel Reese watched. And what metastasized within her in that moment was not anger. Anger is fuel. It is fire you can harness. This was colder, deeper, more insidious. It was the chilling whisper of irrelevance. Irrelevance is the kryptonite of the elite athlete. Jealousy can be channeled into outworking. Frustration can be forged into focus. But irrelevance, it's a vacuum. It hollows you out. It whispers that the world is moving to a rhythm you cannot hear, toward a destination your map doesn't show. And Angel Reese, the headline, the brand, the unstoppable force whose very presence dictated game plans, felt the terrifying sensation of becoming a spectator in her own career in real time. Let me make this concrete. On paper, nothing changed. She was on the floor, same reps, same drills, same orange jersey, but basketball is not played on paper. It's played in the spaces between intention and action. And in those spaces, the story was being rewritten. Passes that once would have sought her out in the post now zinged to the weak side corner. Plays that should have initiated with an entry pass now began with a drag screen 30 feet from the basket. The rhythm, the pulse, the unspoken priority of the offense had found a new heartbeat. And it wasn't hers. Angel fought it. She called for the ball with a voice that grew louder, more insistent. She sealed her defender with more force, claiming space like sovereign territory. She did everything that had always worked, everything that had made her a star. But here is the brutal, beautiful truth about basketball at this altitude. You cannot legislate gravity. You either possess it or you orbit someone who does. And in this gym on this day, Caitlin Clark had become the sun. The entire solar system of the offense began to revolve around her touch, her vision, her decisions. The assistants noticed first, their clipboards suddenly active, pens scribbling not just evaluations but revelations. They charted how Caitlin manipulated defenders with her eyes before her dribble, how she created passing lanes out of geometry and guile, how she elevated the competence of every player sharing the floor with her simply by the options she created. Then the head coaches noticed. Their conversations became hushed, their glances longer, and that's when Angel understood the terrifying new reality. This was no longer a competition for a roster spot that had been decided in the first 10 minutes. This was a silent audition for the soul of the team. This was about who would hold the compass when the game was in the balance, who the system would be built around, not just who would fit within it. And as she watched Caitlin, with a nonchalance that was itself a statement, drill a step-back three from a distance that seemed to redefine the very dimensions of the court, sending a wave of murmured awe through the gathered elite, Angel Reese understood. The vote had been held. It had been unanimous, and she hadn't even seen the ballot. You might think it's just practice. One day, Angel is too proud, too talented, too decorated to be undone by a single session, and under normal circumstances you'd be right. But this was no normal session. Because what was coming, the controlled chaos of the scrimmage, would act as a pressure chamber, exposing a fissure that no amount of talent or trophies could plaster over. The game was speaking a new language, and fluency was no longer optional. As the coaches' whistles sliced the air to set the scrimmage, Caitlin jogged to her position, a portrait of serene focus, already playing sequences in her mind that wouldn't unfold for another 3 possessions. Angel walked to hers, but her gaze was a laser fixed on the source of the new gravity. And what simmered behind those eyes wasn't just competitive fire. It was the dawning panic of obsolescence. The whistle blew. And the controlled environment shattered. This was no longer pedagogy. This was primal. 10 of the planet's most talented basketball players split into squads with nothing but a scoreboard and pride, raw, vaulting, dangerous pride on the line. No cameras, no fans, just the truth of the game, naked and unfiltered. The teams were set. Caitlin at the point for one, Paige Buchers spacing the floor beside her, their synergy immediate and almost telepathic. Angel, a pillar of defiance, anchored the other. From the very first possession, she declared her intent not with words but with territory. She met Caitlin not at the three-point line but at half-court, her defense less a stance and more an invasion of personal space, a physical question posed with elbows and chest. Caitlin's answer was a dissertation. She read the aggressive angle, accepted the contact, used it as a pivot, and with a crossover that was less a move and more a spatial illusion, she split the defense. The pass that followed was a crisp, one-handed dart to the corner for an open three. Swish, no celebration, just a retreat, a reset. But Angel's jaw clenched. She had asked the question the basketball world had been asking: can she handle this level of physicality? The answer had been not just yes, but watch me use it. And here we must understand the context. FIBA basketball is a different beast. It's a land of forgiven fouls, of constant contact, of wars fought in the post and on the perimeter. To prepare for this, the coaching staff had imported a scout team, tough, hungry players from small colleges, their sole mandate to emulate that bruising international style. to grab, to hold, to harass. Caitlin didn't just survive it, she weaponized it. She used defenders' aggression against them, turning their momentum into driving lanes, their closeouts into passing angles. She saw the game in frames ahead of everyone else. One possession seared itself into the memory of every witness. Caitlin drove baseline, collapsed the entire defense, and in midair whipped a no-look, one-handed pass behind her back to a cutting teammate. The pass was perfect, a bullet to the shooting pocket. But the recipient, startled by its velocity and audacity, brought the ball down, fumbling the sure layup. Caitlin didn't yell, she didn't gesture, she simply offered one look. A look that carried the weight of a new expectation. The ball will be here, be ready, this is the pace now. The message was received. But Angel, watching from across the divide, was receiving a different, more devastating transmission. The game was speaking in a syntax of speed and vision, and her traditional dialect of power and position was becoming a second language. Possession after possession, the gap widened not just on the scoreboard but in philosophy. Caitlin's team played with a flowing, interconnected rhythm. Angel's team played with the staccato frustration of individuals. The hollow feeling in Angel's chest expanded into a cavern. She needed to reclaim the narrative. She needed a moment so emphatic it would reset the clock. On the fifth possession, she created it. As Caitlin brought the ball up, Angel didn't just meet her. She launched herself into Caitlin's path, a collision masquerading as a hard hedge. The impact was sickeningly loud in the silent gym. Caitlin hit the floor, shoulder first, skidding. The ball trickled away. The world froze. Angel stood over her, chest heaving, a statue of unleashed fury. In that suspended second, the veneer of practice completely stripped away. This was no longer a basketball play. It was a declaration of war written in flesh and bone. The referees hesitated, whistles dying on their lips. Every person in the gym held their breath, waiting for the reaction, the retaliation, the outburst, the chaos. It never came. After 3-4 seconds, Caitlin pushed herself up. A slow, deliberate rise. She dusted off her shorts, adjusted her jersey, and without a glance at the referees, without a word to Angel, walked back to her position. But she did offer one thing, a look. A calm, penetrating, utterly unshaken look that carried a single devastating message. Is that all you have? That look didn't anger Angel, it unmoored her. Because true dominance isn't shown in the explosion, it's revealed in the aftermath. It's the bedrock that remains when the earthquake is over. Caitlin's response was to simply continue being excellent. The very next possession, ball in her hands, she pulled up from 27 feet. Swish. The following play, a pocket pass leading to an and one. Swish. She was a metronome, unwavering, her composure itself a weapon more destructive than any foul. Angel scrambled to respond. She demanded post touches, called isolations, tried to summon the physical dominance that was her trademark. But the ecosystem had changed. The ball didn't find her in rhythm. Her moves, usually so overpowering, seemed slow, predictable against the frantic, spaced-out scrambling her team was now forced into. The frustration began to leak out, a slapped thigh, a curse to the rafters, a foul born of irritation rather than tactic. The coaches saw it, the players felt it, and Caitlin just compounded it with a relentless, serene, unanswerable excellence. You can duel an opponent, you cannot duel a paradigm. With 12 minutes left, the scrimmage was functionally over, a 19-point chasm yawning between philosophy and tradition. But for Angel, stopping meant accepting. And acceptance was a surrender she could not fathom. So she did the unthinkable. In the dead ball, she didn't approach her coach. She didn't go to the bench. She called a personal timeout in the middle of a Team USA scrimmage and walked directly toward Caitlin Clark. The gym became a museum, every player a frozen exhibit of anticipation. Coaches leaned forward, hands on knees. The air vanished. Angel stopped inches from Caitlin, a proximity meant for intimidation. Her voice, when it came, was a low, vibrating wire of control stretched to its breaking point. "You think this changes anything?" she hissed, the words meant for Caitlin alone but heard in the soul of everyone present. "You think because you can shoot from the logo, because you can throw a fancy pass, because these coaches are falling all over themselves to crown you, you think that makes you better than me?" Caitlin said nothing, didn't blink, didn't nod, just held the gaze. Her silence was an impenetrable fortress. Angel wasn't looking for a debate, she was looking for a crack, a flicker of doubt, anything to prove the new gravity had a weakness. Caitlin gave her only stillness, and in that stillness Angel saw the reflection of her own escalating desperation. The moment stretched, taut and unbearable. Then, without another word, Angel turned, not to the bench, not to her teammates. She turned and walked straight off the court, through the lane, past the stunned coaches, and shoved through the heavy double doors into the hallway beyond. The doors swung shut with a sound like a full stop at the end of a painful sentence. On the court, the aftermath was a numb shock. Paige Buchers approached Caitlin, her voice gentle. "You okay? That wasn't about you, that was about her stuff." Caitlin nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the still vibrating doors. She understood something far more complex than a personal slight. She saw the beginning of the narrative hurricane, Team Caitlin versus Team Angel. The nuanced, painful truth of two phenomenal athletes under unimaginable pressure would be flattened into a simplistic, marketable war. And the war was coming, whether she wanted it or not. Outside in the sterile hallway, Angel Reese was on her phone, tears of fury and despair cutting tracks through the sweat on her cheeks. "They've already chosen," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm not going back in there." Back in the gym, the head coach gathered the shell-shock group at center court. "What happened today stays in this gym," she said, her voice heavy with the knowledge that such a request was futile in the digital age. "We are Team USA, we handle our business internally." She then turned specifically to Caitlin. "You did nothing wrong, you elevated everyone, but understand situations have consequences, not fair ones, just consequences." Caitlin nodded. She knew. By tomorrow, she would be cast as either the humble heroine or the arrogant usurper, a pawn in a story much bigger than a scrimmage. As the sunset bled orange through the high windows, painting the scene of the clash in ironic beauty, Caitlin gathered her bag. The gym was quiet now, just the echo of squeaks and the ghost of collisions hanging in the air. She walked towards the exit, choosing a different door than the one Angel had used, a small, symbolic path of her own. She stepped out not into victory, but into the eerie calm before the media storm. The walkout was the headline, but the revolution, the quiet, seismic shift in the hierarchy of an entire sport had already happened. It happened in the 90 seconds before the door squeaked. It happened in the way a ball moved, in the space a player saw, in the unbearable weight of a new truth settling onto a court. The doors had swung shut on an era, and a new one, for better or worse, had just begun.